The American market is vast, with huge production, huge population, and a high standard of living. The consumer economy of our nation is chugging along well. Nonetheless, our people simply need more. It's only the American way to constantly seek more, both in terms of profits and in terms of a better life. The problem with generating higher profits for any business is often the lack of a market to sell to. Our own people can only consume so much. This means we're going to have to look to foreign markets. I got a lot of comments in the first part of this video asking for basically a ton of conquest and war. I'm sorry to disappoint the poor commenters, but come on, really? Like, war is so boring in Victoria 3. I'd like to think that tanking an enemy's GDP by just replacing their entire industry with exported goods from my country will somehow feel more satisfying. With that in mind, that's our goal for this video. We're going to massively expand our domestic industries by using them to provide for foreign markets, which will have two effects. First, it will generate massive profits for our local industries, and second, it will outcompete every domestic industry of the nations we export to and cheapen their goods, causing their GDP to sink. We're going to reach some pretty absolutely insane heights for this video, which I'm pretty excited to show off, and we're also going to be making New York have more people in it than it has in real life. Let's get into it. Before we can go around crashing other economies, we're going to need to ensure that we can build profitable industries. This is going to be the part of the video where I show you how to make an extremely highly populated state. I'm going to do this with New York, since it is our market capital. Market capitals have a bonus to migration attraction. In terms of reasons to focus a population entirely into one state, there isn't a hugely compelling case besides it being really fun for roleplay purposes, but ultimately consider this. We have some hundreds of thousands of unemployed people across the empire, and we could go around looking for them in all of our states, and we could build industries in those states locally for them, or we can just create a ton of jobs in one place and let our pops slowly migrate into that one state. Ultimately, it's a lazy decision, but I'm not trying to waste my time playing optimally here. I'm just looking for some fun before the game's performance makes that impossible. So what industries are highly profitable and provide lots of jobs? Textiles. Above all, clothes and luxury clothes have an easy to maintain supply chain. See, I learned this while making this video. Certain industries are extremely difficult to continuously develop due to their reliance on an unsustainable supply chain. Let's talk about furniture and textiles. First off, textiles, which are perhaps one of the greatest industries in the game for profits and wages. With the most advanced production methods, and with luxury clothes on, this is what the supply chain looks like. We've got dyes, fabric, electricity, tools, silk, and rubber. Most of these are simply raw resources which are quite easy to get. Any agricultural resource usually isn't too much to worry about since China exists. One state in China, or India even, will have several hundred levels of agriculture which can produce what often feels like an endless supply of fabric, dyes, and silk. The only raw material consumed here is rubber, which can be a roadblock. Thankfully, rubber is surprisingly plentiful in the game, especially if you can secure the Congo. From there we have two sub-supply chains for electricity and tools. Thankfully, producing both of those things is relatively efficient itself. The only limited raw material in this chain is the wood for the tools. Unfortunately, wood is a resource which can quickly run out. That being said, tools workshops don't consume all that much, so you should be okay. This is in stark contrast to furniture, which we'll have a look at now too. Furniture is made with hardwood, tools, wood, oil, fabric, and electricity. The oil and electricity are just for assembly lines, which you don't necessarily need, since it often isn't worth it to use oil on something like this, but it depends on how much oil you have, of course. Here's the problem with furniture. Hardwood and wood are a surprisingly limited resource, and most importantly, often not profitable. You'll notice that in my run, hardwood ends up being extremely expensive, so I built up all the lumber camps I could. Nonetheless, hardwood remained expensive. Upon further investigation, it's because our standard of living is so high that most of the logging camps can't make money under the weight of these huge wages. My response? Subsidize them. And oh crap, I'm suddenly spending over £1 million to subsidize wood camps. Furniture, for this reason alone, is not a great choice for mass export. With that in mind, you'll see me doing furniture industries here anyway. You can safely ignore this choice of mine and instead focus almost completely on textiles. When evaluating what industries to build, consider the raw material input as the primary limiting factor. The deeper buried in the supply chain a raw material good is, the less of it you need, generally speaking. For example, the tools we use for textiles ultimately consume wood, iron, and coal as their raw materials, but not very much at all to need such a huge amount in comparison to the hardwood input of a furniture industry. The even nicer thing about textiles is that everywhere in the world has a constant and ever-growing need for them, and even our own citizens do. This keeps demand extremely high for consistent profitability. Anyway, we're going to throw down a few hundred textile mills in New York and create jobs that we can't necessarily fill right now. This is because we can fulfill those jobs using immigrants from across the country. The way immigration is calculated is based on the relative standard of living in a state compared to every other state in its market. That's the base. From there are many modifiers for it, like having a trade center and stuff like that, but those don't actually matter. The big one that matters is the state unemployment modifier, which can cut your migration attraction to 1/10 of its size. The ultimate way to encourage immigration is to have no unemployment in a state, and to have unemployment in every other state. If every state is getting a 0.1 multiplier on its attraction, and New York is getting even a normal level of attraction, it's going to bring in millions of immigrants. This will also attract migration targets from foreign powers. The way migration targets work is when a state has extremely low migration attraction, the people there may choose to migrate en masse to a particular state. They choose that state based on the attraction of the states which have migration laws that would let them in. If you're thinking ahead of how our mass export economy and immigration targets work, you might get a sense of how we're going to shoot New York's population through the roof. Essentially though, when it comes to domestic immigration, we'll be seeing New York get huge population booms as unemployed people in the plains, the south, and in our colonies start heading over to get a job in textiles. There's one thing I want to make clear in this video as well. What I'm doing right now is not at all entertaining to watch as a piece of gameplay, but to play it feels so much damn fun. I had a great time watching numbers go up in this playthrough, but there's no way for me to show that to you via the gameplay, since the gameplay is, well, mostly just planning an economy and checking on availability of resources so we can keep building. Oh, here, I know the fix. Now this gameplay is engaging. Either way, we've got the two important pieces of our plan going. Let's execute it. In order to keep profits high on the ever-increasing number of textiles we're building in New York, we're going to start prioritizing exports, even though it hurts our tariffs. Then we're going to export to literally every nation out there. Even though some of those exports are small numbers, this is only because the demand for clothes in those regions isn't high enough yet to increase its level. Remember though that as standard of living increases, so too does consumption. This means that those trade routes will make pops generally gain standard of living because their goods become cheaper, so we can artificially pump up another nation's standard of living, which will over time increase the trade route level. This actually applies to all the goods we make. So long as they're consumed by pops, this basically means trade routes like steel likely won't naturally grow as standards of living go up, but routes like furniture and clothes will. When we do more trade routes, we also create a ton of highly paying jobs through trade centers, which will pop up in states with ports, alongside the actual jobs of our export industries themselves. You're going to notice the game absolutely chugging as I make these trade routes. This is because the game is made out of spaghetti code which can't easily handle the constant calculations around prices that trade routes modify. To best understand how outcompeting foreign industry works, we have to look at buy orders and sell orders. You probably understand what these are already, so I won't go over them, but when we create export trade routes, we create buy orders which are classified as trade route buy orders. Those buy orders exist in foreign markets as trade route sell orders. Price is determined by the ratio of buy orders to sell orders. So check this out. When I send grain to the Russian market, we get this little predictor for how it'll affect the price of the good in both of our markets. We're going to make grain cheaper in Russia by sending them this grain. In the case of grain though, even extremely low prices are still profitable in most cases, since grain tends to be relatively cheap to produce. For something like clothes though, well, when I export 4,500 clothes to Italy, look at the price difference they end up with. The price for clothes drops from almost £50 to just 17. So what implications will that have, you might ask? Any textile industry in Italy is going to immediately crash and burn now that their main output good has had its price slashed. If Italy's textiles industry crashes, their GDP will too, and the citizens will be out of jobs, generating radicals. What do radicals do? They create turmoil. What does turmoil do? It lowers migration attraction. What happens when attraction is low? People leave. Where do they go? Well, hopefully, New York. From here, it's just kind of luck where they go. There's no way to really guarantee that this will result in an immigration target to our country, unfortunately, but it worked for me with England, whose textile industries I basically completely crashed, and then whose people came over to my country. This is hugely crippling to Britain, who is losing both GDP and population thanks to my dominance over their economy. Ultimately, a trade route can never go beyond level 100, so you can only export so much stuff to one market. But no AI I've ever seen has had such a big economy that a level 100 trade route isn't enough to effectively ruin them. In particular, by grabbing the macroeconomics tech, you can make every trade route more effective. This tech has something called trade route competitiveness, and if I'm being honest, I don't actually know what that modifier does. I get the feeling it has to do with which markets trade routes are allowed to grow over other markets, but I have no evidence of that, just a gut feeling. So what do we do if we want to have even more control over an opponent's market prices? Many nations have either mercantilist or protectionist trade policies. These policies apply tariffs to trades, which reduce their level by making them less productive. If we can convince our opponents to switch out to free trade, we can send them even more stuff. For nations which are not great powers, you can even grab yourself a treaty port, like I did to Qing. Treaty ports let you get all the effects of free trade against an opponent without anyone else also getting it. You can also still trade with that market even if it embargoes you. One failure of this strategy I came across was with France. When I opened their market and force-fed them clothes and shares, they just embargoed me. I couldn't do much about that besides try to get them to major power and then get a treaty port in them, but that would take many wars to do, which I wasn't willing to go through with for laziness issues. By opening a market, you can further flood its market with cheap goods that ruin their industries, and we can see that effect by checking on Britain's GDP after I opened their market and comparing it to our GDP growth. I would have gone over the war with Britain, but I have squad infantry. Britain still uses skirmish infantry. This war was a joke. A naval invaded London, occupied the whole country, and the war was over. The only thing of note here is that during the war my trade routes stopped working, obviously, and this meant a lot of my textiles stopped being profitable briefly. I chose to subsidize them during war so they wouldn't start losing all their cash reserves. This made the war prohibitively expensive for the time that it went on, but once it was over, it would be worth it. Most importantly though, I was able to tank Britain's GDP by destroying their local industries, since they were no longer profitable in the face of cheap American goods. Looks like I'm getting to about 4 billion GDP now, while Britain is stagnating, let's say. Funnily enough though, their standard of living is going to the moon. This is because with all these cheap goods coming in, their people are actually living genuinely better lives. This actually hurts them more, since now their people want higher wages, making local industry even less profitable. Hell, since I hit 30 standard of living, I actually need to use subsidies to keep most of my industries from collapsing under the cost of all those wages. I'm not sure at what point standard of living gets so high that an industry can no longer be profitable. Basically, my textiles are exporting a massive amount of clothing and still need government subsidies to run. I've been hitting a wall on resources like rubber and dye. I'm basically out of those things, and I could get more by conquering some rubber from Indochina. I could get more dyes by taking just a single state from China and maxing out its dyes agriculture. But again, if I'm being honest with you, the game is running at about 2 years an hour. Unlike with my first 1936 playthrough as India, this playthrough is using immigration and trade as its main strategy. These two mechanics cause horrific lag, so until the game gets some kind of performance update, I'm good on that one, bro. This means that having reached 4.5 billion GDP and 32.4 standard of living in 1907, I'm going to cut this run. The video isn't quite done yet though, because I need to show off New York, Texas, and California, which I put immense effort into turning into huge metropolises. I chose 3 states to focus on, and in theory I'd have done more, but I eventually lost patience with the poor performance. I call these the greatest states of America. Check out New York. We've got almost 24 million people here, which is more than actual real-life New York's population of about 20 million. This state accounts for a little over a quarter of the nation's GDP via its textiles, electricity, tools, and glass. New York's biggest minorities are English, Irish, Mexican, and Greek, along with a myriad of all sorts of different peoples. The standard of living here is at 33. Let's take a look at the other end of the nation, California. California has a population of 21.6 million people. This doesn't even compare to its real-life population, but I still think it's kind of impressive considering that's how many people Delhi has in my game. This still makes up another quarter of the economy with just over 1 billion GDP. California is well known for its furniture, tools, glass, and groceries, alongside miscellaneous industries. California's biggest minorities are Irish, Australian, Amazigh, and Vietnamese. Alongside, as across the whole nation, a massive amalgamation of all kinds of cultures. The people here live at a standard of 32, so a little worse than New York. Finally, let's take a look at Texas, which I had just started to build up before giving in to all the lag. Texas has only a minuscule 9.5 million pops, and it contributes just under half a billion GDP. Pathetic, given that that's only a little bit more than Britain's entire GDP, but we'll let it slide. Texas is known for its oil, sugar, and tools. The biggest minorities in Texas are Portuguese, Mexican, Vietnamese, and Bulgarian, with a massive collection of other cultures too. They live at a level 31 standard of living, which is simply pathetic in comparison to the other 2 greatest states of America. I wanted to try having each state have its own unique industry to be proud of, but ultimately most of them got railroaded into textiles, tools, and electricity, since those industries tend to be so profitable. In theory, I could have done more work to conquer additional land for more raw materials, but I'm not going to beat a dead horse talk performance again. So those are the greatest states of America. This run was great fun, and honestly, I'm pretty impressed with my performance. This was the highest GDP and highest standard of living I've ever obtained in any Victoria 3 game. I had lots of fun playing the game in a way that was more intended. Remember that Victoria 3 is not really a war game, it's an economics game. I'm going to try incorporating a lot of what I learned in this run into future runs so I can dominate my opponents through exports rather than just defeating them with war. I'd encourage you to do the same. If you want this run to be continued, I'm just going to be straight up with you. It's highly unlikely, unless this video really blows up and demands a sequel. I got about 8 hours of footage, which is normally how much I go for when I record for these videos. You'll notice that only about 20 years passed from the beginning of this video to the end. That's because it took me 8 hours to play 20 years. That is unbearable. I'm genuinely sorry for not providing more, since I know this run could get even more powerful if only I had the patience. Regardless, I hope you enjoyed what I was able to provide. Thank you for your time.